Hello everyone, this is Hispa. Welcome to my channel. With this new video, I will continue my podcast series, this time with a short one, in which I am going to talk about a very old topic in our beloved board game HeroQuest. Yes, I am referring to its unwanted erratas. Well, I think erratas can be considered part of the history of HeroQuest. The players of this game have had to deal with several editing failures since the 90s, which certainly sometimes made classic HeroQuest as a board game a bit awkward to play. All the old Spanish HeroQuest players, myself included, still remember what I believe is the most infamous translation error ever seen in a HeroQuest product, calling the elf hero on the basic game box as troll, an error that Milton Bradley never corrected in any subsequent reprint in that language. But there were many other erratas back then, depending on the language version you were playing. The classic Spanish version also had significant errors in the orc and goblin monster cards, making the latter as powerful as a Chaos Warrior. The other European versions of the game also had several errors or at least somewhat loose translations, and even some blatant errors in the original English version, especially in some of the quest maps in the expansions, or the well-known error in the Ring of Brilliance from the Dark Company Maxi Quest, whose rules unfortunately were missing in all languages. But life in the 90s was different than it is today. Back when the classic HeroQuest products were sold, there was no home internet, so there was no way to compare the game with versions in other languages or consult errata lists. Therefore, kids back then were forced to fix the game bugs on their own, as best they could, or simply live with them, happily ignoring them while immersed in their fantasy games, which I think was the most likeliest scenario at the time. At the beginning of the 21st century, when were emerging most of the first fan websites dedicated to HeroQuest, a mysterious one-page digital document titled HeroQuest Official Errata began circulating through internet. Supposedly written and shared by Hasbro with permission, it listed most of the known errata in classic UK products of the game and how to fix them. I must admit that the authenticity of this document has always intrigued me because I have had it in my personal archive since then, but unfortunately I have never been able to track its true origin. It is dated year 2006, more than a decade after the release of the HeroQuest board game and after Milton Bradley had ceased production. So I am sorry to be so skeptical about the document's authenticity, but I have always had a reason to think it might be a fake. Perhaps simply the work of an old fan of the game who labeled it as official for some reason. If anyone listening can provide more accurate information about the origin of this file, please let me know in the comments below. In any case, if true, this document would be the first official errata list ever created for HeroQuest, and also probably the last. Let's talk about it. When Avalon Hill Hasbro announced the impressive return of the HeroQuest board game to stores in September 2020, fans wondered how the game would be relaunched. Would they simply reprint the classic game and its expansions with a new look and minor improvements, or would they instead release a completely revised version of the classic game with modern-style rules and adventures as others had attempted before? Well, today we know what ultimately happened, and Hasbro decided to go with the first option. I think most fans accepted this decision as it would give everyone the opportunity to own all the classic expansions or at least a redesigned version of them, while also enjoying entirely new material never before seen in the classic versions, that was also being released for the modern version. From a marketing and product development standpoint, everything seemed to be going well with the franchise revival, except perhaps for a few things. Players who received their first copies began noticing that some had more erratas than desired, in addition to other serious production issues that are out of the scope of this podcast. Nonsensical text in the rules, important symbols missing from the quest maps, and translation errors quickly began circulating on social media. sometimes suggesting that the editors and translators had not put much effort into the product's quality. Even the first Spanish version of the modern HeroQuest, making history once again and establishing it as something of a franchise tradition, included a glaring error in the course game hero cards, as all 4 heroes were now armed with a broadsword, including the wizard. Then, information about erratas in modern HeroQuest products started spreading randomly across the internet without any order, especially on specialized forum websites like the legendary Yeol Inn. So, in late 2021, someone suggested opening a dedicated thread to collect all the newly discovered bugs and discuss them. Well, the person saying this finally accepted the challenge and got to work from then on. I opened the new corresponding thread on the Yeol forum website, compiling all the known errata in the first posts, and I thought it would be a good idea to classify the solution status of each errata using a color code. But the real intention of the new thread was, of course, to allow any forum member to share any new errata findings there and suggest possible solutions, which would then be analyzed and discussed there with other members. Meanwhile, as new findings surfaced and fans came up with new solutions, I was responsible for updating the initial posts in the thread, always striving to have the most up-to-date version of the complete errata list. I can say that this entire process turned this thread into the most viewed in the history of the Yeol forum website, with nearly 500,000 views at the time I am recording this podcast, far ahead of the second most viewed, the major Yeol thread where the main news about the HeroQuest relaunch by Avalon Hill has been actively discussed since 2020. So based on this, anyone can imagine how many errata have been identified in modern HeroQuest products, and the interest they have generated within the forum over the years, surely more errata than most fans of the game would like, unfortunately. Then, step by step, the errata compilation list was built over time, including official corrections posted by Avalon Hill members via social media for some of the more blatant errors identified by fans, as well as official solutions for many other questions they asked about the game rules. So I would say this unofficial errata list also began to evolve into a list of frequently asked questions. Just to mention a few of those official answers relevant to fans compiled in this thread are the responses from Dob Hopkins, the most well-known game designer from modern HeroQuest, clarifying hot topics such as the multiple attack rules of the Roach Hero, how to use the elemental style cards of the Wandering Monk Hero, and how the rules for the spawnlings in the Jungles of Delrark expansion should be interpreted correctly. In my opinion, and I believe in the opinion of many fans, the modern version of the game and its expansions have unfortunately had more errata and rule errors than one would expect from a game with the prestige of HeroQuest, especially considering the development resources a company like Hasbro should have. It is well known that some of these errata have been truly disappointing. But of course, I don't think it is all bad. To be fair, I admit that sadly, HeroQuest is not an exception in today's game industry. I think finding errata in a board game today is incredibly easy, just as it was in the 90s. We could check how many threads about errata and frequently asked questions can be found for modern board games on the reference website Board Game Geek. Furthermore, I must say that I think Avalon Hill has done its best to resolve many of the issues related to this topic once fans discovered the errata. For example, I recall that Avalon Hill quickly fixed the typo found on the hero cards in the Spanish version of the base game, providing the correct cards for download from their website, and even mailing a complete physical set of corrected base game cards to everyone who requested it. And finally, I must also admit that I feel the number of errata found in the latest HeroQuest products has decreased significantly compared to the earlier releases, even in their translated versions, which is a clear sign that Avalon Hill has finally taken this issue seriously, which of course is very good news for players and fans of the game. But I think the main problem this issue means for many players, and which remains unresolved, is that Avalon Hill has never published an official errata list or a frequently asked questions document, only offering some punctual support to fans through social media, and they have even published online versions of the expansion questbooks without correcting the most obvious misprints found in their physical counterparts. I understand this is likely due to the limited resources of the Avalon Hill design team, which, from what I understand, is not very large, but in my opinion, minimal customer support that officially corrects errata is something any board game developer should publish nowadays to help players play their games correctly and as a sign of respect for them and the product itself. But, well, things are as they are. However, fortunately, I think that players of HeroQuest have access to a good alternative today. Thanks to the support of many other fans, I can assure you that the errata thread that has been maintained for years on the Yeoldin forum website is the most complete errata list you will probably find for modern HeroQuest, at least for the English and Spanish versions of the game. This thread, which link can be found in the description below, has been maintained with the best intentions since its creation, which is simply to provide the fan community with a place to gather all the errata and their official fixes if available, to make playing easier. I know many people have been asking for a printable version of this errata compilation for years, and I do plan to do it sometime in the future, but I honestly have not done it yet because this errata thread was a living document constantly changing with new updates and official fixes with each new product release, so I decided to postpone this task. I am sorry, but I will get to it. But there is something else I would like to share with you, something I am very proud of. One of the most rewarding aspects of working on this errata list over the years is that, according to very reliable sources, I can now confirm that members of Avalon Hill even consulted this unofficial errata list to correct some of their previously published products. Although I only learning of this long after they had used the errata list, you can imagine how well I felt at discovering this small valuable contribution to the official HeroQuest legacy, both on my part and on the part of everyone who collaborated over the years to build this compilation. Well, I think it is a good idea to end this video with these words. But before I go, it is also worth mentioning for anyone interested that there is also another useful thread on the Yeoldin forum website created by the legendary member Bearhead Warrior, which compiles all the known errata and some frequently asked questions for the classic versions of HeroQuest. You can find the link to this other thread in the description of this video podcast. And now, Jess, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please give it a like so the channel can keep growing, and click the subscribe button to stay up to date with the upcoming podcast. See you soon in my next video.